The Yakuza slash Like a Dragon series is known for a whole lot of different things, but being scary really isn't one of them. However, this means that when the series does very rarely dip into the horror genre, it makes for some of the most memorable moments of the whole franchise. At least to me. And seeing as it's Halloween, there's no better time to take a comprehensive look at the horror of the Yakuza series. Mwahaha. I think that the most obvious example of this, and something that has pretty much become a series staple at this point, is the Ghost Substory. The first one in the series was way back in the original Yakuza 2. Kiryu gets a cursed videotape from a man, and when he watches it, it's clear that the substory is an ode to the ring. Kiryu gets approached by an exorcist who wants Kiryu to pay a very big fee to get cleansed of these evil spirits. If you refuse the exorcism, you see a creepy woman staring at you from outside of Shangri-La. If you go closer to her, she disappears and she drops a note telling you to go to a back alley, and when you go there, Kiryu gets to jump. But one of the attackers is the exorcist from earlier in the substory, and Kiryu tells him it was smart to have a woman try and pretend to be a ghost to play into their scheme, but the exorcist says he has no idea what Kiryu's talking about, meaning that Kiryu saw a real live ghost. He will do nothing with this information. Then the next one to appear in the series was in Yakuza 5, where Akiyama hears about and investigates a supposedly haunted photo booth at one of the Club Sega arcades. Basically, there's a ghost that photobombs people's photos, and Akiyama sees the ghost photobombing his photo, and he chases the ghost down, and he catches the ghost. Only to learn that it's just a guy who likes to prank people and makes their experiences a bit more memorable by making them think they saw a ghost. Or at least, he was a prankster. Until someone got mad at him and chased him down, and he ended up running right into oncoming traffic and got himself killed. Meaning that Akiyama encountered the real-life ghost of the prankster at the Club Sega arcade. He will do nothing with this information. Majima needs to meet a ghost in Yakuza 0 to become friends with the video store clerk. Once the friendship meter is almost full, you must find a woman in white with a supposedly super sexy videotape, and she's located near the Odyssey warehouse. She tells Majima that she's cold, so you need to go get some Odin soup from one of the convenience stores. You can trade it with the woman for her videotape and then bring it back to the video store to watch it with the clerk. Majima and the clerk are very let down, as the tape has no picture and it's just audio of a woman talking about how cold she is. Majima and the clerk talk some more, and then the ghost woman appears behind them, saying that she isn't cold anymore. Majima encountered a real-life ghost, but he doesn't really know about it, so I'll let it slide for now. Kiryu meets ghosts again in Yakuza 6 in the Onamichi graveyard, and they're the three ghosts of 16th century pirates. After every single fight, Kiryu wakes up on the ground of the graveyard, and he also meets the groundskeeper of the graveyard, who it turns out is a descendant of the pirates, and he believes that by fighting Kiryu, the ghosts are still sorting out the regrets they have in life, and they're keeping them bound basically to the mortal realm. Kiryu fights the ghost one more time, and this gives them the chance to move on. This means that Kiryu has once again encountered real-life ghosts, and fought and beat up real-life ghosts, and does nothing with this information. And then the videotape ghost story from Yakuza 2 reappears in Yakuza Kiwami 2, just with more actual scenes of the ghost. The ghost itself is more prevalent instead of only showing up once in the original, but aside from that, it's pretty similar, pretty much the same thing. And then Ichiban meets a ghost in Like a Dragon, but that sub-story is supposed to be more bittersweet / sad than scary or spooky, so I won't talk about it here. But he meets ghosts too, and he does nothing with that information. And while I'm still on the topic of ghosts, let's not forget that you can take pictures of ghosts in Yakuza 6 Fatal Frame style. Although maybe really it's more Metal Gear Solid style, where they pop up in the pictures you're taking, you're not really taking pictures of the ghosts. And these ghosts are all of characters who in games before Yakuza 6 had died. So, spoilers I guess, but I feel like if you're watching this video, you probably know enough about the story, so these won't be any real spoilers. To take pictures of the ghosts, first you need to find a portrait of them located somewhere in Kamurocho, and the characters and their portrait locations are Shinji Tanaka. His portrait can be found inside of the MEB, and his pictures can be taken inside of the MEB, then on Pink Street, and then also around Shangri-La. Sohei Dojima. His portrait is in front of where the old Dojima family office was back during the events of the first Yakuza game, and his pictures can be taken all over, like in front of the office, or even at the batting cages. Shintaro Kazuma. His portrait and his first picture are both at the side of the Millennium Tower, and the rest will be taken on Tenkaichi Street and in the sewers. Yumi Sawamura. Her picture is just north of the Millennium Tower, and her pictures can be taken inside of New Serena or at the different parks around town. Akira Nishikiyama. His portrait is in the middle of the bottom floor of the Millennium Tower that you can access, and his pictures can be taken inside of the Millennium Tower, New Serena, the alley behind Cafe Alps, and where Udabori's tattoo studio was during the events of the first game. Osamu Kashiwagi. His portrait and first picture are inside of a club on Tenkaichi Street, and his other pictures can be taken inside of Kanrai, Korean barbecue restaurant, the Millennium Tower, and his old castle building that he used to own that appeared most prevalently in Yakuza 0, that's where you fought him as Majima, and then also in Yakuza 3, that's where the ex-Yakuza Hitman missions were started from. Lao Ka Long. His portrait can be found inside of the new and renovated Little Asia, and so can all of his actual ghost photos. Yoshitaka Mine. His portrait can be found in Theater Square, and his pictures can, like some of the others, just kind of be taken all over town. There doesn't seem to be very much rhyme or reason for his. Masaharu Ihara. And now we're getting into some of the more obscure characters who have ghost photos. Well, there's only 2 of them, but these last 2 are a bit more weird. And you might not recognize Ihara by the name, but he's the guy whose murder was the inciting event at the very beginning of Yakuza 4. His portrait can be found at the intersection of Senryo and Shichifuku streets, and his pictures can be found all behind New Serena, which is where he was murdered in Yakuza 4. And finally is Yoshinobu Tokugawa. He was the final shogun of the Tokugawa shogunate, and he appeared in Like a Dragon Ishin, sharing the appearance and actor of Daigo Dojima. His portrait is near Tenkaichi Gate, and the pictures can be taken near Tenkaichi Gate and inside of the Millennium Tower. The spirit photos aren't really anything too scary. They're more of a reflection on how far Kiryu has come and how much he's lost throughout the series up until this point, especially because Yakuza 6 was supposed to be his final game at one point in time. At least that's how I see it. This doesn't apply to some of the photos though, as I don't think Kiryu really cares for someone like Lao Ka Long, and he probably doesn't even know that Ihara exists. And him feeling sorrow for the loss of Tokugawa would be like me weeping for the loss of former United States President and vampire hunter, Abraham Lincoln. I am weeping because he was gone too soon. That's... But I can definitely imagine these giving someone a good scare if they didn't know that they existed. Like, imagine you're just walking around, messing around with the selfie feature in Yakuza 6 with the cell phone, and then BAM! Get photobombed by a ghost. That could definitely catch me off guard, and I imagine it definitely has caught some people off guard in the past. Thought it was scary enough to include in this video. Just seems pretty creepy to me. But Yakuza 6 also has a few horrors of the more extraterrestrial variety. Aliens. More specifically though, UFOs. After beating Yakuza 6 and starting up the premium adventure mode, visitors from out of this world venture to Kamurocho and Onomichi, but you can only see them under very particular circumstances, or really with a very particular piece of gear. Firstly, you need to go to the Ebisu Pawn in Kamurocho and buy the UFO Finder. This item is only available in Premium Adventure and is what keeps you from seeing the UFOs in the main story. Now you just need to equip the UFO Finder and head to the right spot. In Kamurocho, the roof of the batting cage is a good spot to catch a glimpse of the UFO. And then in Onomichi, head to the Senkoji Temple up the mountain and you'll see the UFO plain as day. Again, not really anything crazy or scary, but it is kind of cool how they hit a nice little Easter egg like this to do in Premium Adventure, because that's something that these games kind of lack, is there usually isn't very much to do in Premium Adventure mode that you can't just do in the main story. So if you do most of your stuff during the actual story playthrough like I do, there's not really much of a reason to go mess around in Premium Adventure, so I like that they have this as an inclusion. And then a real UFO also makes a quick little appearance at the end of a side case in Lost Judgement, in which Yagami investigates a string of fake UFO sightings, but there is a real one at the end of it, and it's a massive one, very big, that's kind of scary. That's the scariest UFO in the whole series. But another icon of modern horror that the Yakuza series uses pretty often are zombies. And obviously the biggest example of this is Yakuza Dead Souls, the zombie spin-off game that they had, completely dedicated to the idea of what happened if Kamurocho became a zombie infection hot zone. And I've never played the game myself, but it is probably at least partially responsible for the series basically completely dying over in the West for a good couple of years in the early 2010s. So it can't really be that bad. I definitely want to play the game myself one day, and I've been keeping my eyes peeled for it at my locally used game stores, but I'm also pretty sure I've heard online that you can still buy it on the PS3 PSN store, so I might just have to go onto my PS3 and just shill out the money for it, because I'm not getting a single copy of it. I doubt anyone in a 100-mile radius of me even ended up buying Dead Souls when it was new. I don't think I'm going to find one. But even though Dead Souls is the biggest example of zombies being used in the series, there are plenty of other examples Like in Yakuza 0, where you as Kiryu have to help Miracle Johnson, who is Yakuza 0's stand-in for Michael Jackson since that game was set in the 80s, you have to help him film the Thriller music video, or at least Yakuza's version of the Thriller music video. So you need to protect Johnson, Miracle Johnson, as he dances his way down Tenkaichi Street, and you need to fight off all of his extras who are dressed up as zombies. And it's a pretty fun escort mission sub-story, especially since you only have to get him to the end of the street, so it doesn't take too long. They show up once again in Yakuza Kiwami, where Majima, as part of the Majima Everywhere side story of that game, ends up faking a zombie apocalypse in Kamurocho, with him and the Majima family all putting on makeup and disguising themselves as zombies to make you think there's been an outbreak of some kind. He even says that he got some really big filmmakers help him out with it, which I can only assume means he got in touch with the crew from the Miracle Johnson video from Yakuza 0. But to me, the Zombie Majima event was one of my favorites of the Majima Everywhere system. It's definitely one of the first ones I remember when I think about Majima Everywhere. And after you complete the event and you beat Zombie Majima, he will just become a possible version of Majima that you can find roaming around the streets of Kamurocho. But that's not it, as the zombies make one final appearance in the Judgement sub-series, in the form of an arcade game, or two arcade games technically, Kamuro of the Dead and Hama of the Dead. And this is really cool, because RGG Studios basically reuses a lot of the Dead Souls zombie types and models, and uses them to basically make a House of the Dead style light gun shooter that you can play in Judgement and Lost Judgment. And as someone who grew up playing House of the Dead and like Time Crisis at arcades and roller rinks and bowling alleys, this is really fun for me. And it's not all that badly designed of a game. I just really wish that there was some sort of light gun support so you could actually play it with a light gun, but obviously that's a lot to ask for one really small mini game in an otherwise very big game. Both of these games are big, but Lost Judgment is humongous, so I know it'd be a lot to ask. The first Judgment game has Kamuro of the Dead, which has you fighting through Kamurocho during a zombie outbreak, and the Lost Judgment has Hama of the Dead, which has you going through Ijincho during a zombie outbreak. Well, something that I thought about while I was thinking about and going through the zombie-related stuff and got to the Zombie Majima is that the Majima Everywhere system in and of itself could be considered a bit of a horror gameplay mechanic, and same goes for Mr. Shakedown from Yakuza 0. I mean, these stalker-type enemies are basically what makes the modern Resident Evil games so much fun to play. You know, those games wouldn't be anywhere near as good if they didn't have enemies like Mr. X, Jack Baker, Lady D. You know, these stalker-type enemies, these ever-present threats that are just roaming the map completely randomly, but you have the chance of running into whenever, is terrifying. And obviously it's not as scary in Yakuza, but it kind of captures that same feeling in a sort of way. More so with Mr. Shakedown and Zero, because obviously you lose all of your money if he shakes you down. You lose everything, which is more scary than a Majima fight. But I think that the Majima Everywhere system has a couple other advantages over the Mr. Shakedown system in terms of horror. Mostly in that Majima isn't always just roaming around like a, Lady D or Mr. X type character. Sometimes he is hiding, and honestly feels like most of the time, he's hiding and, some could say he jump scares you, he ambushes you. He'll jump from the rooftops or pop out of a sewer grate or a trash can or out from a big ass traffic cone. You don't know where he's at, and there's always some tension surrounding him, and if you're gonna bump into him. I mean, Kiwami is probably the hardest game in the series, especially on like legend difficulty. So when you're weak and you're underpowered, bumping into a boss just out of nowhere can really mess up your day. And because of that sense of dread that these systems can invoke in the player, I think that they're pretty fitting in a horror type video. But as for some more corporeal threats, Yakuza Like a Dragon has a sub-story about a masked murderer. It's called The Masked Murderer. It's a very simple sub-story. Ichiban hears rumors about a blood-covered man who hangs out in Koreatown. If you go to where the man is spotted at night, Ichiban will see the masked man covered in blood and with a huge knife or cleaver. You'll get into a fight with him, and if you defeat him, it turns out that he is just an amateur butcher. He is the son of the owner of the meat shop in Koreatown, and he's not very good at what he does. So he's training to get better at his butcher skills, but he splatters blood everywhere. So he puts on the hockey mask and the apron, and he does it at night so people don't really see him, but he's been scaring people. But it turns out it's just a big misunderstanding, and even gets added to your pounds mates list. You can call him and he will do damage to enemies and also have the chance to inflict fear or fright or whatever the status effect is called in Like a Dragon. So I think that's scary. He even scares the characters in game. I think that's fair game for this video. But I think it's really cool that the butcher is basically just a walking Jason Voorhees reference, so I had to include it. None of the stuff I've talked about so far has really been too scary. You know, it's more spooky or creepy, or some of it's even kind of cool, like the UFOs. But now I want to get into the stuff that is actually scary. Or at least I think it's actually scary, or at least tense. Firstly, Yakuza 3 has a scary game mode that is pretty much straight out of a survival horror game. It's called Survival Tag, and I already talked about it briefly in a previous video going over the secret game modes of Yakuza 3, where I said I'd talk about it again if I did a Halloween special, so here we are. For the uninitiated, Survival Tag spawns you into Kamurocho as a completely unarmed and defenseless Kiryu. You receive text on your phone giving you hints on where you need to go, and you need to go find the place that the text is telling you about and take a picture of it. You have to do so within a set time limit, and if you don't, you fail, game over. And so far, it just seems like a fun way to test your map knowledge. They send you to some pretty obscure corners of the city. Like, it's difficult. But the main challenge comes from the fact that the map is being patrolled by a squad of clowns using the Bob Utsunomiya model. If you get spotted by one of them, they will chase you, and you need to outrun them. If even one of them catches you, it's game over. You lose. So Survival Tag turns into a really exciting game of hide and seek, where you need to do both. Not only do you need to seek out these places in the city to take the pictures and appease the game master, but you also need to hide from the bots. And the fact you need to complete 10 of the objectives means you have a lot of work to do. It's not like you've got 3 to take and then you're done. No, it takes, I'd say, probably like a good half hour, 45 minutes to get a complete run of Survival Tag. It is an investment to try and beat this mode. But the objectives, I think, are what really makes the mode. Is if it was just a survive the bobs for 10 minutes game mode or whatever, that could be really boring because you could just find some like public restroom to hide in and just hunker down and they never find you. It'd be boring. Making the player need to leave their safe zones is a great way to keep things tense, as a clown could be around absolutely any corner. And I really wish RGG did more experimental gameplay like this in later games. And I know that they brought Survival Tag back in Yakuza 4, but it was only on the PS3 version and hasn't been brought into any of the remastered versions. Womp womp. If you haven't played Survival Tag yet, I think you absolutely should. There's literally nothing else like it in the series, at least nothing that you can play with the newest releases of these older games. Then next up, Kappas. If you aren't familiar with them, Kappas are creatures in Japanese folklore. They live in water and they drown people who get too close, and they also have a very big penchant for cucumbers. Most of the time in video games, Kappas are portrayed in more of a lighthearted way. Like Kappin in Animal Crossing is a very good example of one. Even in Yakuza, they've been portrayed this way, because in Yakuza 0, they used a Kappa as the mascot for the karaoke minigame. Even has a little CD on his head instead of a bowl of water. It's cute. But now I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, there's a sub-story in Yakuza 4 where Kappas appear. The sub-story follows Majima as he tries to catch a rumored Kappa that is supposedly living underneath Kamurocho. The Kappa you catch turns out to just be a dude in a costume, but the sub-story ends with a cutscene revealing that there's a very real Kappa dwelling in Kamurocho, and Majima very nearly catches a glimpse of it. And if you just play the main story and the sub-stories, that's all the Kappa you'll see. But if you decide to play the Ultimate matches though, Ultimate Sprint 3 sees Majima outrunning not just one Kappa, but a whole pack of Kappa. So this isn't just an Ultimate match, there's no context given as to why he's running from the Kappa, and maybe this is an alternate way the sub-story could have went down had Majima been successful in finding the actual Kappa. The one singular Kappa was unsettling enough, but you only really got to see it for a couple seconds in a cutscene, and you only saw its face. Not here though, pal. You get to see the whole thing, and they are not fun to look at. Yakuza 3 and 4 have a cool little thing where all the main characters look amazing for the time and still hold up really well in my opinion, but throwaway NPCs do not look very good at all. Tons of characters have a very uncanny look to them in these games, and the Kappas are just the absolute worst of it. And they just look so off-putting, you know, their green, like kind of slimy looking skin, their Stewie Griffin football heads. They don't even really have too big of beaks that Kappas have, they just look like they have normal person mouths. They just look really off. And as for what happens if they catch Majima, we can only assume the worst, because it is said that Kappa's second favorite food, behind cucumbers, is human flesh. But the good thing about Kappas is that you don't need to cross paths with them. If you just stick to the main story, you'll never run into them. No, go back and rewatch that section and take a shot every time I say Kappa, you will be dead. But that same sense of security doesn't apply to the next monster that stalks Kamurocho, the Hangman. Hangman first appeared in Yakuza 6 as a dastardly denizen dwelling inside the dilapidated and decaying ruins of Shangri-La, the brothel that got completely wrecked during the events of the first game in the series. He wears some kind of black gimp suit outfit with a ball gag in his mouth that looks like an eyeball. He's also completely jacked. He's built like a brick shit house, and he's a very formidable opponent. He's not quite strong enough to beat Kiryu, especially not with Somaya accompanying him at this point in the story, but he's a very creepy and memorable boss from Yakuza 6. But that isn't the last that we'd see of the Hangman. He reappeared in the following game, Judgement, and he's one of the few actual characters who crossed over from the main Yakuza series into that detective spin-off. I think he might even be the only character who crosses over. Hangman's role is very similar to the role that he plays in Yakuza 6. Near the end of the game, Yagami and Sugiura are investigating an abandoned hotel in the north end of Kamurocho called Monsieur Lee. They go there because of a lead in the mole case that is the main driving force of Judgment's story, but this also happens to be the current abode of the Hangman. It seems like he just likes to frequent these abandoned brothels, and that's kind of just his shtick. I think if anything, he might be a bit scarier in Judgment because he pulls off some Batman maneuvers and literally yanks Sugiura away from you, leaving you all by yourself for most of the section, unlike Yakuza 6 where you had Somaya with you the whole time. Eventually, you save Sugiura and fight and defeat Hangman, and this is the last time you ever see him in a main story of a Yakuza game, that is. Despite never being a mandatory obstacle again, Hangman makes more appearances in games going forward. First, he shows up in Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, but only as an opponent in the game's Coliseum fights. And this isn't scary, but it does show that he's still alive at this point in the story, which would be right after the events of Judgment. This is also a good time to mention Redman, a recolor of Hangman who appears as an opponent in the Coliseum in Kiwami 2. There's no real info on Redman. We don't know if it's the same character or the same person as Hangman, but he's just a Coliseum opponent, so again, not really scary. I'm not going to dwell on him for too long. But the man-type enemies make their final appearance in what is currently the most recent game in the franchise, Infinite Wealth. They are the Hitman enemies, and they're just recolors of Hangman. The main appearance that I remember of them is in the District 9 long battle in the first third of Infinite Wealth's story. But we aren't here for them, because after all, they're just more recolors of Hangman, and why settle with just the cheap copies when the OG is right there? Because that's right, folks, Hangman also appears in Infinite Wealth. But not as a boss, not as an enemy, not as a stalker, but as a lover. Because Hangman is one of the catfishers you can text in the mismatch minigame. He goes by the name of Saori in the minigame, and needless to say, Ichiban is a little weirded out. Thankfully for Ichiban, it seems like he caught Hangman in a good mood, and nothing bad comes from their little run-in. But all this talk of creepy guys, ghosts, yokai, it's all very boring probably to anyone who's under the age of 12. And I feel like I need to talk about something that'll connect more with a younger audience. And what gives Gen Alpha and younger Gen Z people the creeps more than liminal spaces? If you've been on the horror side of the internet in the last few years, I'm sure you're already familiar with the concept of a liminal space is. And if you aren't, liminal space is just a general term used to describe any creepy abandoned place that should be bustling with people, but it isn't. Very popular examples of this are things like abandoned malls, abandoned hospitals, abandoned schools. Again, anywhere that should have a decent amount of people in it, but just doesn't, that falls under the category of a liminal space. And Yakuza doesn't have too many scary places, but when it does, they usually try and go all in on the creepy factor. But it does have one place that I would consider falls under the category of a liminal space, and to find it, we have to return to Yakuza 4. Yakuza 4 is very notable for having the most explorable version of Kamurocho that the franchise has ever seen, including exploring the rooftops, exploring the streets, and the underground. You might be expecting me to say that the sewers are my Yakuza liminal space, but I actually find them kind of cozy, and that's mostly just because there's enough NPCs down there to keep it from feeling creepy. And there's even a restaurant down there. You can't be scared when there's a restaurant around. No, instead, my Yakuza liminal space is the Theater Square Underground. During the main story, quite a bit happens here, especially in Akiyama and Saijima's sections of the story. Like, Saijima literally goes down there and takes over the old base of the gang that Akiyama kicked out of the underground and makes it his hideout. But once the story is done and you've completed all of the sub-stories, it becomes completely abandoned, aside from Minamita and his IF-7 machine for learning some extra skills and boosting your heat meter. The Theater Square Underground, it's an underground shopping mall, and there's trash everywhere, most of the stores are completely shuttered, and the few that aren't are completely gutted. There's also a transformer room down here which is also pretty much completely empty, save for some benches, boxes, and some sporting equipment like baseball bats and a basketball hoop, probably for the employees who would go down there. The last stop is the Millennium Tower basement, and this area is more cool than creepy to me as it has a ton of these great floors and you can see the subways going by beneath you as you hang out in here with the lights lighting up the room that you're in. And then both of the ways that you can go forward from this room just take you back up to street level. I think the real thing that makes this area creepy to be in is just how quiet it is. Because normally you would hear the city ambiance, but there's absolutely nothing down here. Even in the sewers, it's not quiet at all because there's just a ton of noise just from all the water being churned around going through the sewers. But here it's just the sound of your own footsteps, that's all that accompanies you. The area just feels so distinct from anything else in the series because even when they do creepy areas, as I mentioned, they usually go pretty far with it. They kind of go all in with it. But this is just unsettling feeling. It feels like something out of the back rooms. And like the original back rooms, not the one with monsters. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, I think Yakuza did the back rooms more justice than American Horror Stories did. Hey Tone, I'm in the back rooms. As I said, there's not a whole lot of things I would consider scary in the Yakuza series. It's very, very rare that the series goes into this territory. But I think this is pretty much everything I felt needed being covered. Except for one more thing. And it's something that I'm surprised I've seen very few people talk about online. I assumed it would be much more well known. Supposedly, in Yakuza 5, in Nagasugai and Kamurocho, is a creature that roams the streets at night. Some kind of freakish, half-shrimp, half-man chimera. They say people who run into it never live to tell the tale. So next time you're just out walking, not a care in the world, minding your own business, be sure to check over your shoulder once or twice. Otherwise, Shrimp Nada might get you. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I just really wanted to do something for Halloween. If you enjoyed the video and you haven't already, please consider liking and hitting that subscription button, because it really helps the channel a lot. And if you haven't already watched it yet, you should consider checking out the Naruto video I made. I put a lot of effort in making it, and I'm pretty disappointed with how it turned out, views-wise, so I think you should check it out. That'd really make my day. Plus, I'm probably going to be making at least one more because I've got the script for the second part of that series already written, and it took me like 8 hours to write or something like that, so I'm not going to let that work go to waste. I will be making at least one more Naruto video. But anyways, that's all for today. As always, peace out, God bless, and I hope you're having a very happy Halloween, or happy All Saints Day if you're watching it the day after Halloween, or just whatever day you're watching the video on. I hope it's a good one. See you next time.
Yeah, cause I got it like that. Flow so smooth like I got it on tap. Yeah, and I'ma say it be a good night while I'm on my Yingling, while I'm drinking Bud Light. Can you get it when you miss me?